Love is blind, but greed gives you 20/20 vision. Daniel Wright thought he was the king of New York. He had the billions, the skyscrapers, and the supermodel mistress. The only thing standing in his way was his quiet, boring wife, Kate, a woman he picked up from a dusty bookstore and planned to discard like last season's Prada. He thought he was divorcing a penniless nobody. He didn't know that by signing those papers, he wasn't just losing a wife. He was declaring war on the most powerful royal family in Europe. Watch what happens when a billionaire realizes his poor wife is actually a princess. The sound of a Mont Blanc pen scratching against crisp linen paper echoed through the silence of the penthouse at 432 Park Avenue. It was a sound Catherine Wright had been dreading, yet expecting, for months. She sat on the edge of the cream-colored Roche-Beaubois sofa, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore a simple navy cardigan and jeans, a stark contrast to the opulence surrounding her. Across the marble coffee table sat her husband, Daniel Wright. Daniel was the poster boy for American excess. At 42, he was the CEO of Wright Capital, a man who moved markets with a tweet and destroyed companies for sport. He was handsome in a predatory way, sharp jawline, bespoke Tom Ford suit, and eyes that always seemed to be calculating the value of whoever he was looking at. Today, looking at his wife of 5 years, he evidently calculated her value as 0. "It's generous, Kate," Daniel said, sliding the document toward her. He didn't look her in the eye. He was busy checking his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked Central Park. $2 million, the apartment in Jersey. You keep the Honda. It's more than you had when I found you. "Found me," Catherine repeated softly. Her voice was calm, almost melodic, showing none of the devastation that should have been there. "You make me sound like a stray dog, Daniel." "Well, look at the facts," Daniel scoffed, turning around. He took a sip of his Macallan 64. "You were working in a dusty antique bookshop in the village when we met. You had student loans. You wore thrift store coats. I gave you this life. But we've evolved in different directions." "Evolved," Catherine said. "Is that what you call sleeping with your publicist?" Daniel's face hardened. The air in the room shifted. The elevator doors at the far end of the penthouse chimed softly. "Jessica is not just a publicist," Daniel snapped. "She's a partner. She understands my world. She fits in at the Met Gala. She knows how to talk to the board. Kate, you're sweet, but you're invisible. At dinners you talk about gardening and books. You embarrass me with your lack of ambition." The elevator doors slid open, and the click-clack of Louboutins announced the arrival of the very ambition Daniel was speaking of. Jessica Hart walked in like she already owned the deed. She was stunning, undeniably. Blonde, statuesque, wearing a red Versace dress that cost more than Catherine's entire pre-marriage wardrobe. She tossed her Chanel bag onto the armchair Catherine usually sat in to read. "Is it done, Richie?" Jessica asked, her voice dripping with a saccharine sweetness that didn't reach her cold, blue eyes. She didn't even look at Catherine. "Almost," Daniel said, his posture relaxing instantly as he looked at her. "Kate is just reviewing the settlement." Jessica laughed, a light, dismissive sound. She walked over and draped her arms around Daniel's neck, leaning in to whisper loud enough for Catherine to hear. "Don't be too difficult, honey. $2 million is a lot for a shop girl. Think of all the knitting supplies you can buy." Catherine stood up slowly. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply smoothed out the wrinkles in her jeans. "I don't want the $2 million, Catherine said quietly. Daniel pulled away from Jessica, narrowing his eyes. "Excuse me. If you think you're going to fight this and get half, you're delusional." The prenup is ironclad. My lawyers are from Cravath, Kate. They'll bury you under legal fees before you even step inside a courtroom. I don't want your money, Daniel, Catherine clarified, her gaze shifting to Jessica, then back to her husband. And I don't want the Jersey apartment, or the Honda. Then what do you want? Daniel asked, confused. Alimony? Stocks? I want a clean break, Catherine said. She reached into her tote bag and pulled out a pen, not a fancy Mont Blanc, but a simple, heavy fountain pen with a crest engraved on the cap that was too small for Daniel to notice. I will sign the divorce papers right now, uncontested. I leave with what I came with, my books, my clothes, and my name. Your name? Jessica giggled. You mean Miller? Wow, hold on to that legacy, sweetie. Catherine ignored her. She leaned over and signed the papers with a fluid, practiced hand. Catherine Wright. But, Catherine added, straightening up, I have one condition. Daniel raised an eyebrow, checking the signature to make sure it was valid. Go on. The charity ball next week at the Pierre Hotel, Catherine said. The Global Humanitarian Gala. You're the keynote speaker. You insisted I attend with you months ago to keep up appearances. I want to attend. One last public appearance as Mrs. Wright before the announcement goes out on Monday. To save face. Daniel laughed, relief washing over him. He had expected a fight for his Hamptons estate. That's it? You want one last night of playing dress-up? Fine. Jess wasn't going to be ready to debut until next month anyway. Perfect, Catherine said. She picked up her tote bag. I'll have my things moved out by tonight. Where will you go? Daniel asked, a momentary flicker of pity crossing his face. The YMCA. Catherine walked to the elevator. She pressed the button and turned back, offering them a smile that was chillingly serene. Oh, don't worry about me, Daniel, she said. I'm going home. As the doors closed, Daniel turned to Jessica and grinned. That was easier than I thought. I told you she had no backbone. Jessica kissed him, smearing red lipstick on his collar. She knows her place, Richie. Some people are born to rule, and some are born to serve. She's just background noise. They toasted with champagne, celebrating their victory. They had no idea that the background noise was about to bring the whole symphony crashing down on their heads. The transition from the penthouse to the street was jarring, but for Catherine it was liberating. She hailed a yellow cab, not a black car. Where to, lady? The driver asked. The Carlisle Hotel, Catherine replied. The driver raised an eyebrow in the rearview mirror. She didn't look like the typical Carlisle guest, but he drove on. When they arrived at the legendary Upper East Side Hotel, Catherine didn't go to the front desk. She went straight to the elevators, inserting a black keycard that bypassed the lobby entirely, taking her to the royal suite on the 30th floor. The doors opened into a space that made Daniel's penthouse look like an IKEA showroom. It was decorated in gold leaf and Louis XVI furniture. Standing by the window, holding a secure satellite phone, was an elderly man in an impeccable butler's suit. Your Highness, the man said, bowing deeply as she entered. Welcome back. Catherine let out a long breath, her shoulders finally dropping. Hello, Alfred. It's good to be back. Please tell me you have tea. Earl Grey. The real kind. Imported this morning from the palace, ma'am, Alfred said, pouring a steaming cup from a silver service. I trust the meeting with Mr. Wright went as expected. He was predictable, Catherine said, taking the tea. She walked over to a velvet armchair and sat down, crossing her legs with a grace she had carefully suppressed for 5 years. He offered me money to go away. He thinks I'm destitute. The arrogance of the nouveau riche, Alfred muttered with disdain. If only he knew that your family's art collection alone is worth more than his entire company. He will know soon enough, Catherine said, her eyes flashing. Did you arrange everything for the gala? Yes, ma'am. The Grand Duke, your father, was displeased to hear of the divorce, but he is flying in, along with your brother, Crown Prince Alexander. They will be attending the gala as surprise guests of the French ambassador. Catherine smiled. It was a wicked smile. And the dress? It arrived from the vault in Geneva an hour ago, Alfred said. He gestured to a large velvet-covered mannequin in the corner of the room. He pulled the cover off. Underneath was a gown that would stop traffic. It wasn't just a dress, it was a statement. Deep emerald silk, custom-made by Dior. But the centerpiece wasn't the fabric. It was the sash, the royal sash of the House of Bourbon-Parma, pinned with the star of the Grand Cross. And next to it, resting on a velvet pillow, was the tiara, the fleur-de-lis diamond tiara that hadn't been seen in public since her grandmother wore it to the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II. Perfect, Catherine whispered. May I ask, ma'am, Alfred said gently, why did you stay with him so long? You could have ended this charade years ago when he first started showing his true colors. Catherine looked out the window at the Manhattan skyline. Because I wanted to be sure, Alfred. I wanted to see if a man could love me. Catherine Miller, the girl with the books. Not Princess Catalina, the heiress to a throne and a banking empire. I wanted to believe in the fairy tale of normal life. She took a sip of tea, her expression hardening. But Daniel proved that for men like him, normal is just code for disposable. He fell in love with a fantasy of a savior complex. He wanted a poor girl he could rescue, control, and then upgrade when he got bored. He broke the only rule my father gave me when I left the palace. Never let a commoner make you feel common. He will regret it, Your Highness, Alfred said. He won't just regret it, Catherine said, standing up and running her fingers over the cold diamonds of the tiara. He's going to learn a lesson in hierarchy. Daniel thinks he's a shark because he swims in a pond. He's about to find out what happens when you swim in the ocean with the whales. Meanwhile, at Wright Capital HQ, Daniel was in a high-stakes board meeting. The company was trying to secure a massive contract with the European Union for renewable energy grids, a deal worth $40 billion. It would make Wright Capital the most powerful energy firm in the world. We're hitting a wall with the regulatory committee in Brussels, his VP of operations, a nervous man named David, said. The permit requires a royal warrant or approval from the Council of Historic Preservation. Specifically, the land we want to build on in southern France, it has historical ties to an old aristocratic family. They have veto power. Daniel waved his hand dismissively. Buy them out. Everyone has a price. Who is the family? It's complex, David said, shuffling papers. The land belongs to the Duchy of Parma and Piacenza, currently held in trust by the collateral branch of the Spanish and Luxembourgish royal families. The head of the trust is very private. We've been trying to get a meeting, but they ghosted us. Keep pushing, Daniel barked. I don't care if it's the King of England. Offer them double market value. I want that deal signed by next week. And get me a meeting with the French ambassador at the gala on Saturday. I'll charm him. Jessica, sitting in the corner taking notes on her iPad, looked up and smiled. You can charm anyone, Richie. Once we get that deal, we'll be the power couple of the century. Forget the Kardashians. It'll be the Wrights. Daniel leaned back in his chair, feeling invincible. He had shed the dead weight of his boring wife. He was about to close the biggest deal of his life. Nothing can stop us now, he said. He had no clue that the head of the trust he was trying to bribe was currently sitting in the Carlisle Hotel, drinking Earl Grey tea and planning his public execution. The grand ballroom was dripping with crystals and old money. This wasn't a Hollywood red carpet. This was serious wealth. Senators, oil tycoons, ambassadors, and tech moguls filled the room. Daniel Wright stepped out of his Rolls-Royce Phantom, Jessica on his arm. Jessica had gone all out. She wore a sheer, sparkling silver dress that left little to the imagination, designed to grab headlines. As cameras flashed, she posed, soaking it in. Daniel beamed, feeling like the king of the world. "They love us," Jessica whispered, waving to the paparazzi. "Look at them." They entered the ballroom, and Daniel immediately began working the room. He shook hands with the CEO of Goldman Sachs, laughed with the mayor, and kept his eyes peeled for the French ambassador, Henri Delacroix. "There he is," Daniel said, spotting the ambassador near the stage. "Let's go seal the deal." He steered Jessica toward the front. But as they approached, he noticed something odd. The ambassador wasn't looking at the crowd. He, and everyone else in the VIP section, was looking toward the massive double doors at the top of the grand staircase. A hush fell over the room. The music, a live string quartet, abruptly stopped, then transitioned into a formal, regal fanfare. "What's going on?" Jessica asked, annoyed that the attention had shifted away from her dress. "Is it a surprise performance? Beyoncé?" "I don't know," Daniel muttered. The master of ceremonies stepped to the microphone. His voice boomed, but it trembled slightly with reverence. "Ladies and gentlemen, please rise." Daniel frowned. "Rise? For who?" The president wasn't scheduled to be here. "Please welcome," the MC continued, "His Royal Highness, Grand Duke Henri of the House of Bourbon-Parma, His Royal Highness, Crown Prince Alexander, and—" The doors swung open. "Her Royal Highness, Princess Catalina." 3 figures stepped onto the balcony overlooking the ballroom. On the left, a tall, imposing man with grey hair and a chest full of military medals. On the right, a handsome younger man in a tuxedo with a red sash. And in the center was Kate. But it wasn't the Kate Daniel knew. This woman stood 3 inches taller in heels that cost a fortune. She wore the emerald gown, the sash of the royal house, draped across her chest, and on her head, glittering under the chandeliers like a halo of ice, was the massive diamond tiara. Daniel's glass of champagne slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor. "That's—" Jessica gasped, her eyes bulging. "That's your wife." "No," Daniel whispered, his brain misfiring. "That's Kate. She buys her clothes at Target. This is a joke. It's a prank." The room erupted into a different kind of murmur, the sound of respect and awe. The entire room, including the billionaires Daniel idolized, bowed their heads or curtsied as the trio began to descend the staircase. As Kate, Princess Catalina, walked down the stairs, she didn't look at the floor. She looked straight ahead, radiating a power that Daniel had never seen. She looked majestic. The French ambassador, the man Daniel had been trying to bribe for weeks, rushed forward to the bottom of the stairs. He didn't offer a handshake. He bowed low and kissed Kate's hand. "Your Highness," the ambassador said, his voice amplified by the acoustics, "we are honored by your presence. We did not know the royal family would be gracing us tonight." Kate smiled, a gracious, diplomatic smile. "Thank you, Ambassador. I apologize for the deception. I have been observing life in New York incognito for some time. But family duty calls." Daniel stood frozen, his mouth agape. People were starting to look at him, then at Kate, whispering furiously. "Richie, do something," Jessica hissed, panicked. "Why is she wearing a crown? People are looking at us like we're idiots." Daniel, running on pure adrenaline and denial, pushed through the crowd. He marched right up to the ambassador and Kate. "Kate!" Daniel blurted out, his voice cracking. "What the hell is this? Is this some kind of costume party? Take that thing off your head. You look ridiculous." The silence that followed was deafening. The ambassador looked at Daniel with pure horror. The Grand Duke, Kate's father, stepped forward, his eyes like steel. "I beg your pardon," the Grand Duke rumbled. "Who is this man who dares to speak to my daughter in such a manner?" Daniel pointed a shaking finger at Kate. "Daughter? I'm her husband. She's Catherine Wright. She's a nobody from the village." Kate turned her head slowly to look at Daniel. Up close, the transformation was even more terrifying. Her eyes weren't the soft, pleading eyes of his wife. They were the eyes of a ruler looking at a peasant. "Daniel," she said coolly, "you seem confused. Let me introduce you properly." She gestured to the older man. "This is my father, Grand Duke Henri, and this is my brother, Prince Alexander." She took a step closer to Daniel, her voice dropping so only he, Jessica, and the immediate circle could hear. "And I am not Catherine Wright. My name is Princess Catalina Marie-Therese of the House of Bourbon-Parma. And as of this morning, when you signed those papers, I am happily divorced." She turned to the ambassador. "Henri, is this the man representing Wright Capital? The one seeking the permits for the land in Provence?" "Yes, Your Highness," the ambassador said nervously. "I see," Kate said. She looked at Daniel, a small, cruel smile playing on her lips. "Well, as the head of the Heritage Trust that owns that land, I'm afraid the answer is no. We don't do business with people who lack integrity." Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. The $40 billion deal. Gone. In a sentence. "Kate, wait!" Daniel stammered, reaching for her arm. Before he could touch her, two massive security guards in suits materialized, blocking his path. "Do not touch Her Royal Highness," one of them growled. Jessica, realizing the ship was sinking, tried to pivot. "Oh my God, Kate! I always knew there was something special about you. I told Daniel, didn't I?" Kate looked at Jessica. She looked at the cheap, flashy silver dress. Then she looked at her own emerald silk. "Ms. Hart," Kate said, "I believe you have my husband. You can keep him. I have a kingdom to run." She turned her back on them and walked into the crowd, the sea of people parting for her like the Red Sea. Daniel was left standing in the middle of the ballroom, surrounded by shattered glass and the ruins of his life, as the whispers of New York's elite turned into laughter. If the gala was the crash, the following Monday was the burning wreckage. Daniel woke up not in his penthouse, but in a hotel room at the Pierre. He hadn't wanted to go home and face the silence of the apartment where Kate used to be. Beside him, Jessica was scrolling furiously through her phone, her face pale. "Have you seen this?" she shrieked, shoving her iPhone into his face. It was the New York Post. The headline was brutal, printed in bold black letters. "The Princess and the Prick." Below it was a split photo. One side showed Kate in her emerald gown and tiara looking like a queen. The other showed Daniel red-faced and sweating, pointing a finger at her, with Jessica looking terrified in the background. "They're calling me the court jester," Jessica screamed, throwing the phone on the duvet. "My Instagram comments are a war zone. I've lost 10,000 followers since midnight. Daniel, fix this." Daniel rubbed his temples. His head was pounding. "Calm down, Jess. It's just a tabloid. It'll blow over in 48 hours. The news cycle moves fast." He was wrong. When Daniel arrived at Wright Capital an hour later, the atmosphere was funereal. Usually, the lobby buzzed with energy. Today, employees huddled in corners, whispering. When they saw him, they went silent and looked at the floor. He stormed into his office. "David, get in here." David, his VP, hurried in, looking like he hadn't slept. He was holding a stack of papers. "Tell me the EU deal is still salvageable," Daniel demanded, pouring himself a coffee. "I'll fly to Brussels. I'll apologize to the ambassador personally." "It's not just the deal, Daniel," David said, his voice shaking. "It's the stock." "What about the stock?" "Look at the ticker." Daniel turned on the Bloomberg terminal on his desk. He gasped. STRL, Right Capital, was down 38% in pre-market trading. The line on the graph looked like a cliff dive. "Why?" Daniel roared. "Because of a gossip column?" "Because of the fraud allegations," David said quietly. Daniel froze. "What fraud?" "When you filed the disclosure forms for the EU energy project, you listed the land acquisition in Provence as secured pending signature. You leveraged company assets based on that land being ours. Now that the princess, your ex-wife, has publicly stated that the Heritage Trust will never sell to us, the SEC is investigating us for misleading investors. They think you lied about having the deal locked down to pump the stock price." Daniel slumped into his leather chair. "She did this," he muttered. "She planned this." "There's more," David continued, wincing. "Since the news broke that Catherine is royalty, the press has been digging into your divorce filing. You offered her $2 million. The public perception is catastrophic. Clients are pulling out. The Teachers' Pension Fund of Ohio just liquidated their entire position in Right Capital. That was a $500 million account, Daniel. Gone." Daniel felt like the walls were closing in. He grabbed his phone and dialed the one number he had ignored for 5 years. Kate. It went straight to voicemail. But it wasn't the old voicemail greeting where she sounded shy and sweet. It was a generic, automated voice. "The number you have reached is no longer in service." He slammed the phone down. "Get my jet ready," Daniel barked. "I'm going to Europe. I need to find her. If I can get a photo of us making peace, the markets will stabilize. She's still Kate. She's soft. I can talk her into it." David looked at him with pity. "Daniel, she's not in Europe. The flight logs show the royal delegation flew to the Cayman Islands this morning." "The Caymans? Why?" "That's where the headquarters of the Royal Holding Company is," David said. "And Daniel, that's where our company's debt is serviced." A cold chill ran down Daniel's spine. He didn't understand the full picture yet. But he knew one thing. The mouse he had kicked out of his house was currently dismantling his life, brick by brick. 3 weeks later. Daniel Wright was a man who prided himself on never begging. But as he stood outside the heavy iron gates of a sprawling estate in the hills of Sintra, Portugal, where the royal family was vacationing, he was ready to beg. He looked unkempt. The stress of the last month had aged him 5 years. The SEC investigation was heating up. The board was threatening to vote him out. And Jessica, well, Jessica had become a nightmare. "It's hot, Daniel," Jessica whined from the rented Mercedes behind him. "And my heels are sinking into the dirt. Can't we just call her?" "Shut up, Jessica," Daniel snapped. It was the first time he had truly yelled at her. She recoiled, shocked. Daniel pressed the intercom button on the gate again. "Daniel Wright, here to see Her Highness, Princess Catalina. It is urgent." A static crackle. Then a voice Daniel recognized. It was Alfred, the butler. "The princess is in the middle of a cello lesson, Mr. Wright. She is not to be disturbed." "Alfred, please," Daniel said, his voice cracking. "I know you can hear me. I flew across the ocean. I just need 5 minutes. I need to apologize." Silence. Then the gate buzzed and slowly creaked open. 5 minutes, Alfred's voice warned. "Do not make me release the hounds. And I am not speaking metaphorically. Daniel got back in the car and drove up the long, winding driveway lined with cypress trees. The estate was breathtaking. A 19th-century palace painted in pastel yellow and pink, overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. It was a world of old money, a level of wealth that whispered rather than screamed. He found Kate in the garden, sitting under a pergola covered in wisteria. She was wearing a white linen sundress and sandals. She looked younger, freer. She was playing a cello, the deep, mournful notes filling the air. She didn't stop playing when he approached. She finished the piece, letting the final note vibrate into silence. "You never told me you played the cello," Daniel said softly, standing 10 feet away. Kate looked up. Her face was impassive. "You never asked. You usually turned up the TV if I tried to practice. You said classical music was depressing." "I was an idiot," Daniel said. He took a step forward. "Kate, I didn't know." "You didn't know I was a princess?" Kate asked, setting the bow down. "Would it have mattered, Daniel? Would you have loved me more if you knew I had a title? Or would you have just loved the access I could give you?" "I loved you," Daniel lied. He tried to summon the charm that had won over investors for decades. "I was lost, Kate. The stress of the business. Jessica, it was a mistake, a midlife crisis. I want you back, not for the title, for us." Kate laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. "You want me back because Wright Capital stock is trading at $1,200 a share. You want me back because the SEC is auditing your books. You want me back because you need the Royal Heritage Trust to sign off on the Provence deal." Daniel froze. She knew everything. "I can change," Daniel pleaded. "I'll sign a new prenup. I'll give you half the company. I'll dump Jessica right now. She's in the car. I'll tell her to walk back to the airport." Kate stood up. She walked over to him, her eyes searching his face. For a second, Daniel thought he had won. He thought he saw a flicker of the old Kate, the woman who used to make him pancakes on Sundays. "You really don't get it," she whispered. "I don't want half your company, Daniel." She signaled to Alfred, who was standing in the shadows holding a silver tray with a document on it. "I already have it." The silence in the garden was heavy, broken only by the distant, rhythmic crashing of the Atlantic waves against the cliffs of Sintra. The air smelled of salt and blooming wisteria, a stark contrast to the sterile, air-conditioned boardrooms Daniel Wright was used to. He stared at his ex-wife. She sat perfectly still, her cello bow resting against her knee, looking at him not with anger, but with a terrifying, clinical detachment. "You have it?" Daniel repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "Have what?" "The company?" He let out a nervous, incredulous laugh. He looked back at Jessica, who was fanning herself with a magazine she'd pulled from her purse, looking bored and irritated. "Kate, stop playing games," Daniel said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Wright Capital is a multi-billion-dollar entity. You can't just have it. I own 30% of the voting shares. The rest is institutional money. You think because you have a title you can just seize a corporation? This is America, not feudal Europe." Catherine didn't answer immediately. She simply gestured to Alfred. The elderly butler stepped out from the shadows of the cypress trees. He held a thick, leather-bound portfolio stamped with a gold crest. He walked over to Daniel and held it out. Daniel hesitated, then snatched the folder. His hands were shaking so badly he struggled to open it. "What am I looking at?" Daniel snapped, flipping past the first few pages of legal jargon. "Page 4, Daniel," Catherine said softly. "Look at the capitalization table." Daniel turned to page 4. It was a breakdown of Wright Capital's major shareholders. He scanned the list: Vanguard, BlackRock, State Street. And then, at the very top, eclipsing them all with a massive 51% stake, categorized under Preferred Class A voting stock and convertible debt obligations. The holder of that stake was listed as Argos Holdings International. Daniel let out a breath of relief. Argos? Kate, you scared me for a second. Argos is my biggest backer. They're a private equity firm out of Zurich. I closed them myself 3 years ago. They love me. They've been buying up our debt to help us expand. You really didn't read the fine print of that deal, did you? Catherine asked, reaching for her glass of iced tea. You were so desperate for the liquidity to buy that skyscraper in Chicago that you didn't ask who was behind Argos. It's a blind trust, Daniel said defensively. That's standard for high net worth funds. Turn the page to the beneficial owner declaration, Catherine commanded. Her voice had a new edge to it, sharp, commanding, the voice of a woman who was done being polite. Daniel flipped the page. Name of beneficial owner, Her Royal Highness, Princess Catalina Marie-Thérèse of Bourbon-Parma. Signature authority, sole proprietor. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Daniel stared at the signature. It was Kate's handwriting, the same loop on the C that he had seen on grocery lists and birthday cards for 5 years. No, Daniel stammered, his brain misfiring. This is a forgery. You own Argos. My family has been in banking since the 17th century, Daniel, Catherine said, standing up and smoothing out her linen dress. When we met, you were struggling. Do you remember 2019? The liquidity crisis? You were weeks away from bankruptcy. You came home crying one night, saying you were going to lose everything. Daniel went pale. He remembered that night. He had sat on the floor of their kitchen, sobbing into her lap while she stroked his hair. I believed in you, Catherine continued, her eyes locking onto his. I thought you were a visionary who just needed a break. So I called my family's trustees in Zurich. I set up Argos Holdings specifically to funnel capital into your company without you knowing it was me. I didn't want to bruise your ego. I wanted you to feel like you did it on your own. She took a step closer to him. I bought your debt. I covered your losses. I was the angel investor you bragged about to your friends at the golf club. Every time you succeeded, it was because I was quietly propping you up from the shadows. I was your safety net, Daniel, and you treated me like a burden. Daniel fell to his knees. The gravel dug into his suit trousers, ruining the fabric. But he didn't care. The realization was physically painful. The woman he had discarded as a shop girl had literally purchased his career to save him. Kate, he choked out. I didn't know, I swear. If I had known, if you had known, you would have just used me for the money earlier. She cut him off. You proved that today. You didn't come here to apologize, Daniel. You came here because your stock is tanking. I can fix it, Daniel pleaded, grabbing the hem of her dress. We can be a power couple. Think about it. The CEO and the princess. We'd be unstoppable. I'll fire Jessica. I'll never speak to her again. Just give me another chance. Hey, Jessica yelled from the driveway, finally looking up from her phone. I can hear you, you loser. Catherine pulled her dress away from his grip as if he were contaminated. It's too late for partnerships, Catherine said. Alfred, give him the minutes from this morning's meeting. Alfred handed Daniel a single sheet of paper. It was a corporate resolution. Notice of extraordinary board meeting, Wright Capital Inc. Motion, removal of Daniel Wright as Chief Executive Officer for cause, citing gross negligence, breach of fiduciary duty, and reputational damage. Vote count, Argos Holdings, 51%. For minority shareholders. For outcome, motion carried. You fired me, Daniel whispered, reading the words through a blur of tears. You can't do that. I'm the founder. Argos Holdings invoked the bad boy clause in your contract, Catherine explained calmly. The clause that triggers immediate termination if the CEO engages in conduct that scandalizes the company. Your public divorce spectacle? The fraud investigation regarding the French land? That's all the cause we needed. Who? Daniel gulped, his throat dry. Who is replacing me? David, Catherine said. He's been doing the actual work for years while you were out having lunch meetings with Jessica. He was appointed interim CEO at 9 Nicolems this morning. Your keycard has already been deactivated, Daniel. Security is packing up your office as we speak. They will mail you a box with your personal effects. Daniel slumped forward, his hands in the dirt. He had lost the wife. He had lost the money. And now he had lost the title. He was no longer Daniel Wright, CEO. He was just Daniel Wright, unemployed. Jessica, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, finally marched over. She looked at the papers on the ground, then at Daniel's pathetic posture. Wait a minute, Jessica said, her voice shrill. Does this mean he's broke? Catherine looked at Jessica with a mixture of amusement and pity. The SEC fines will likely take his liquid cash. The divorce settlement is zero because the prenup was voided by his fraud. And he has no salary. Catherine paused for effect. So, yes, Ms. Hart, he is effectively poor. Jessica's face twisted in disgust. She looked at Daniel, who was still kneeling in the gravel. You told me you were worth $3 billion, Jessica screamed at him. You liar, I missed Fashion Week for this? She turned to Catherine. Look, Your Highness, or whatever. I didn't know. I'm a victim here, too. He manipulated me. Save it, Catherine said, turning her back on both of them. Alfred, please escort Mr. Wright and Miss Hart off the estate. If they are not on the public road in 5 minutes, release the dogs. And Alfred, use the Dobermans. Very good, ma'am, Alfred said, a small, satisfied smile playing on his lips. Alfred grabbed Daniel by the arm. Up you get, sir. Dignity is a lost cause, but let's try to preserve the trousers. Daniel stumbled to his feet. He looked at Kate's back one last time. She was already adjusting her position on the chair, raising her bow to the cello strings. She didn't look back. She had already moved on. As Alfred marched them down the driveway, Jessica was already on her phone, frantically swiping through a dating app, looking for a new target. Daniel walked in silence, the weight of his own hubris crushing him. Behind him, the sound of the cello rose again, a deep, resonant melody that sounded less like a song and more like a victory march. 6 months later. January. The wind in Queens didn't just blow, it bit. It had a way of finding the gaps in a coat, especially a coat like the one Daniel Wright was wearing. It was a synthetic blend, bought off a clearance rack at Macy's, stiff and smelling vaguely of factory chemicals. It was a far cry from the cashmere overcoats and bespoke vicuña wool he had worn for the last decade. Daniel stood on the elevated subway platform at Queensboro Plaza, huddled against a rusted steel pillar. His breath misted in the freezing air. He checked his watch, a Casio with a cracked face. His Patek Philippe had been the first thing to go, sold to a pawnbroker to cover the retainer for a criminal defense lawyer who eventually quit on him. He was heading to Long Island City for a job interview. It wasn't for a CEO position. It wasn't even for a VP role. It was for a mid-level supply chain manager at a logistics firm. The salary was $65,000 a year. Daniel used to spend that on wine in a single weekend. The train screeched into the station, a deafening metal-on-metal grind that made Daniel wince. He stepped into the crowded car, keeping his head down. He had learned the hard way to avoid eye contact. In the weeks following the scandal, people had recognized him. They had filmed him with their phones, shouting, "Hey, look, it's the guy who tried to con the princess," or "Where's your tiara, Richie?" Now, with a scruffy, grey-flecked beard and dark circles under his eyes that looked like bruises, he was just another exhausted face in the New York commute. The office was a grim, fluorescent-lit space in a converted warehouse. Daniel sat across from the hiring manager, a man named Kyle, who looked no older than 26. Kyle was wearing a hoodie and spinning a fidget spinner on the desk. "So," Kyle said, looking at Daniel's resume on his iPad. He didn't offer Daniel water. "Your resume is interesting. You have a gap here for the last 6 months." "I took some personal time," Daniel said, his voice raspy. He cleared his throat. "To reorganize my priorities." "Right," Kyle said, smirking. He tapped the screen. "And before that, you were the CEO of Wright Capital. That's a big jump down to logistics coordinator, isn't it? Why do you want this job, Mr. Wright?" Daniel swallowed his pride. It tasted like ash. "I'm looking for stability. I have a lot of experience in operational efficiency. I think I can help your team streamline its distribution channels." Kyle stopped spinning the toy. He leaned back, crossing his arms. "Look, I'm going to be real with you, Daniel. Can I call you Daniel?" "Yes. We Googled you. Everyone Googles everyone." Kyle turned the iPad around. On the screen was a collage of headlines from the New York Post, Business Insider, and the Daily Mail. "The billionaire who lost it all." "Wright fraud, how one man lied to a princess." "Sec bans Daniel Wright from trading for 10 years. "You're radioactive, man," Kyle said, not unkindly, but with a brutal, casual honesty. "My boss would kill me if I hired you. Clients would see your name on an email and run. We handle shipping for some sensitive accounts. We can't have drama attached to our brand." "I was never charged with criminal fraud," Daniel argued weakly. "It was a civil settlement. I admitted to record-keeping errors." "That's it." "It doesn't matter," Kyle said, standing up. "Perception is reality. You taught us that in your TED talk back in 2018. Remember? I watched it in college." The irony hit Daniel like a physical blow, his own philosophy weaponized against him. "Thanks for coming in," Kyle said, already looking at the door. "Good luck out there." Daniel walked out of the warehouse, his legs feeling heavy as lead. That was the 7th rejection this month. He had no money left. The SEC fines had wiped out his liquid savings. The forensic accountants hired by the Royal Trust had found every offshore account, every hidden shell company, and drained them to repay the investors he had misled. He had nothing. No Hampton's house, no penthouse, no driver. And Jessica? That was the quickest exit of all. The day the news broke that he was insolvent, she had packed her bags. She didn't even leave a note. He saw her 3 weeks later on Instagram, tagged in a photo on a yacht in Dubai, hanging off the arm of a Saudi oil heir. She looked happy. She looked expensive. She hadn't looked back. Daniel walked aimlessly for blocks, the cold numbing his fingers. He needed coffee. He found a small, greasy spoon deli on the corner of a busy intersection. The windows were steamed up, shielding the inside from the grey street. He walked in, the bell jingling above the door. The smell of frying bacon and old coffee was overwhelming. He counted the crumpled bills in his pocket. $4.50. Enough for a coffee and maybe a bagel. "Regular coffee, black," Daniel muttered to the man behind the counter. $3, the man grunted. Daniel paid and moved to the side, wrapping his frozen hands around the paper cup for warmth. He leaned against the window counter, staring out at the slush on the sidewalk. "Turn it up, Joey," a customer at one of the tables shouted. "It's starting." All right, the counterman said, grabbing a remote and pointing it at the television mounted in the corner. Daniel glanced up instinctively. The screen was filled with gold. It was live footage from Vienna, the Schönbrunn Palace. The headline on the bottom of the screen read, "Royal Wedding, Princess Catalina, weds Duke of Södermanland." Daniel froze. The coffee cup trembled in his hand, splashing hot liquid onto his wrist. But he didn't feel the burn. The camera panned over a sea of guests, kings, queens, presidents, celebrities. And there, standing at the altar of the palace chapel, was Kate. She was breathtaking. She wasn't wearing the simple cardigan she used to wear when she read on their sofa. She was wearing a gown of ivory lace with a train that seemed to go on for miles. The diamond tiara, the one that had started this entire nightmare, glittered on her head. But it was her face that captivated Daniel. She was smiling, a genuine, radiant smile that reached her eyes. She looked powerful. She looked at peace. Standing next to her was the groom, Duke Lars of Sweden. He was tall, with kind eyes and a strong jaw. He wasn't a shark like Daniel. He was a philanthropist, a man known for his work in ocean conservation. He held Kate's hand like it was something precious, not something he owned. The news anchor's voice cut through the noise of the deli. It is a fairy tale ending for Princess Catalina, also known to many as the business queen of Europe. Since taking over the helm of her family's private equity firm, Argos Holdings, the company's value has tripled. Interestingly, one of her most successful assets, Right Capital, just reported record profits under its new management. The camera cut to a shot of the crowd applauding. In the front row, Daniel saw David, his old VP, the man who had replaced him. David looked happy, clapping enthusiastically. Even he had been invited. The princess has stated that she plans to use her platform to advocate for financial literacy for women. The anchor continued. A cause she says is personal to her, having overcome what she calls a difficult and controlling past relationship. The deli fell silent as the couple on the screen shared their first kiss. It was tender and respectful. "Now that's a classy lady," the guy at the table said, biting into his sandwich. "Lucky guy, that Duke. Imagine letting a woman like that go." Daniel felt a lump form in his throat, so large he couldn't breathe. He remembered the last anniversary he had shared with Kate. He had bought her a vacuum cleaner. He remembered telling her she was boring because she wanted to stay in and play Scrabble instead of going to a club. He remembered the look in her eyes when he told her he was leaving her. Not anger, but a profound, quiet disappointment. He realized now that she hadn't been boring. She had been content. She hadn't been weak. She had been restraining her power to let him shine. She had dimmed her own light so he wouldn't feel overshadowed, and he had hated her for it. He had chased the illusion of value, the flash of Jessica, the spike of a stock price. And in doing so, he had thrown away the only thing in his life that was truly rare. "Hey, buddy," the counterman shouted. "You gonna buy something else? This ain't a library. You can't just stand there watching TV." Daniel snapped out of his trance. He looked at the screen one last time. Kate was walking down the aisle, confetti raining down on her. She looked at the camera for a split second, and Daniel felt like she was looking right through the screen, right through the years, and seeing him standing in a deli in Queens with coffee stains on his cheap coat. She didn't look angry. She just looked done. "No," Daniel whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm done." He turned away from the warmth of the deli. He pushed open the door and stepped back out into the brutal New York winter. The wind hit him instantly, stinging his eyes, bringing tears that froze on his cheeks. He zipped up his jacket, buried his hands in his empty pockets, and began the long walk to the subway. He blended into the crowd, a grey figure against a grey sky. Daniel Wright, The man who wanted to be king had finally gotten his wish. He was entirely, perfectly, and tragically alone. The story of Daniel Wright is more than just a tale of a bad divorce. It is a modern tragedy of perception. Daniel believed that value was something you could count, weigh, and trade. He looked at a diamond and saw wealth. He looked at a book and saw boredom. He failed to understand that the most valuable things in the world, loyalty, grace, and genuine love, often come in humble packaging. He spent his life trying to upgrade his existence, never realizing that he was already living in a palace, built by the quiet devotion of the woman he betrayed. By the time he understood the true hierarchy of the world, he was already at the bottom of it. So, the next time you feel the urge to judge someone by their shoes, their car, or their quiet nature, remember Daniel. Remember that the nobody you are dismissing today might just be the queen who holds the keys to your kingdom tomorrow. And that is the incredible, heartbreaking, and satisfying story of the billionaire and the princess. I have to ask you guys, do you think Daniel's punishment fit the crime? Was leaving him jobless and alone too harsh, or was it exactly what he deserved for his arrogance? I'm really curious to hear your take. Drop a comment down below. I'll be replying to the best ones. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. It really helps the algorithm find more people who love drama just like us. And if you're new here, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story. We have a crazy tale coming up next week about a lottery winner who hid his ticket from his entire family. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching. Stay humble, and I'll see you in the next video.